think we can look forward to two really exciting papers on design ethics, and I think they're very complementary, so hopefully that will come out in the presentations. So I've decided I'll leave the introduction to the authors because several of them have got very difficult to pronounce surnames, so please, over to you.
Okay, thanks. All right. So, hello everyone, I'm Jonathan. I'm the Director of Humanities at Shenkar College, as you can see there, and my colleague obviously is not here. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it due to COVID-19 restrictions, but his name is unpronounceable. Even after I've been friends with him for almost 3 years, so it's Gershon Zweig, as I know, but he's from Elisava School of Design and Engineering in Barcelona. Okay, so I'll just dive straight in. Again, as mentioned, I'm going to discuss very briefly what can be called applied ethics in design practice. So in a nutshell, our paper conceptualizes professional design as practice with its specific intrinsic rewards and standards of excellence. And that will be the structure of this short lecture. So first of all, I'm going to discuss briefly how design is indeed a practice and not only something a bit less. Then we will argue for reconsideration of responsibility in design, what we call professional responsibility, and defend the view that responsibility is a virtue and not only a set of norms or values. And finally, we will make the case that a designer's personal investment in the design profession can be seen as a way of self-enactment and not only some obligation or external obligation. Okay, so some points of departure. First of all, as I mentioned before, our first point of departure is that design is a profession, and professions are indeed moral projects. And in that we can say that, first of all, design is indeed a profession, and you'll see one of various definitions of a profession. And again, it is a moral project and not only an applicable project. So as we can see, almost 2 years ago, I met Ariel through a fairly new venture that I co-founded and established almost 2 years to the day in March 2020. And it's called the Social Design Network, and it's an international venture into social design. And again, it was almost 2 weeks before the very first pandemic, so we started working through Zoom. And as we can see here, professions are different than other types of occupation, as we all can say a big thank you to all the medical staff throughout the last 2.5 years. And we can say very confidently that professions are those occupations that both require advanced study and mastery of a specialized body of knowledge and undertake to promote, ensure, or safeguard some aspect of others' well-being. And that is very important because as teachers and healthcare professionals, designers do indeed study for a very long period of time. And then they have ramifications of their actions throughout a very large population of people. And again, as we will see in a few minutes, a long design history, as we can see in the last 120 years, only we can say very roughly that in the last 60 years, designers started tackling what is currently called the wicked questions of design. And we can surmise that there are two classical ways designers think of their practice. First, as suppliers of industry, or as something else. And again, we will nudge you towards the second option. Because again, as Adolf Loos mentioned, if we don't want to think of designers as what he called educated carpenters, and again, I really love carpenters, but they do not need to study for 4 years or 5 years or more. So if we think of designers as more than problem solvers, then what is their role? Okay, so again, design is a profession, and we can agree on that first axiom. And as you can see, if you know this project in Barcelona, it's a very interesting project that is called the Superblock project. And almost 30 years ago, Barcelona started changing the layout of the city. And they kind of took into practice several key strategies. First of all, that pedestrians take precedence over cars. And second, that they have to work with communities. Okay, so currently co-design is very popular throughout the design practices, but it was a very big deal 30 years ago. So if you just Google it up, you'll see that there's a lot of byproduct of these changes. People, if you know the whole happy city approach, people are happier, they have cleaner air, etc. And that is a very interesting example that designers have impact on a very, very large population of people. And just think of one designer in IKEA, for example, that decides to not produce chairs for the next 10 years. The ramifications would be considerable. Okay, so design is a professional practice, and as a professional practice, we have to consider what this approach entails. Okay, so again, as we can surmise so far, designers have some ethical responsibility towards others. But indeed, contrary to classic ethics from a philosophical point of view, designers find themselves in a sort of a bind between industry, because they have to make a living, and their personal and professional moral values. Okay, so one of the key thinkers and philosophers we kind of adopted was McIntyre, and he says that a practice can be understood as a specific type of social cooperative activity with specific intrinsic rewards, its own standards of excellence, methods, tradition, vocabulary, and values. And again, that could be a very interesting definition of design, again, as a practice and as a profession. And as such, we have to agree again that, again, if you know a bit of ethics or McIntyre, you know that there's a difference between external and internal goods, and that's the title of Ariel's last book. And internal goods are the goods that designers take for themselves. For example, money or prestige and awards. Excuse me, that's the opposite way. External goods are the goods that people get from the outside, but internal goods are the goods that people kind of define for themselves. Okay, for example, as educators or people that have students and not only work in the industry, we have something else. We feel obligated and we feel happy when our students make things, change things. So we have the ability and the necessity to receive some sort of goods that are not material in their nature. And that led us to what we call professional responsibility. So if we say that design is a profession, then we have to think and consider what will be defined as responsibility in design practice. And again, responsibility usually in popular language means some sort of obligation towards oneself or towards others or value systems. We mean something a bit different. Okay, responsibility is not a burden. I mean, it is in a way, but it's not solely a burden. Okay, a professional responsibility means that designers need to switch or redefine some of their key values from one system to another. Okay, and again, professional responsibility could be defined as a virtue, as something that a designer, both as an individual and as a part of a discipline and a practice, needs to define and needs to strive towards. Okay, so again, responsibility means something very, very specific in design practice. Again, contrary to philosophical ethics. Okay, so when designers work in a studio, obviously, again, as I mentioned, one sort of responsibility would be to consider their own work. Okay, so are they making a good work? Is their work important to themselves and to others? And that, again, the next step would be if indeed we consider responsibility as something that is not only a burden but something else, we have to add another concept, and it will be one of the last, that is care. And again, care, obviously, you all know there was a very important network of design as care, and care has surfaced a lot in the last few years. Contrary to empathy or empathetic design, again, that tomorrow Kenny will discuss it in the morning, care is a bit different than empathy. Because usually designers care about something, but more rarely they care for something. Okay, so they care about the environment, they care about refugees, they care about people. But we kind of stress towards caring about the discipline and about designers' action in and for their practice. So again, one of the definitions of care is an ongoing relational practice that shows us how to respond to needs and why we should. It builds trust and mutual concern and connectedness between persons. Okay, so again, as we can see in various projects throughout the last few years, care has become one of the key aspects in design. And again, not only in the peripheral or relatively peripheral views of inclusive design or social design, but as a key practice in mainstream design. But again, when we say that designers need to care, the classical point would be, again, caring for other people, and usually it goes to healthcare design. We mean that there is one part that designers tend to neglect or even forget about, and that's two things that are very, very important to ethics. First of all, designers need to care about themselves. And about themselves, that means that they cannot create a rift between their own personal value system and their job. I mean, there is kind of almost a psychological problem that people say, I'm not my job. I mean, I do design and my values are different. And as we have seen through Zaha Hadid's famous words that she's not responsible for all the workers that died building her stadiums back in Qatar and all these other, in Israel, that workers die on construction site. But it is, I mean, it can be an option, but it could drag some very important psychological problems. So when we say that designers need to care about themselves because they have to make a living, I mean, they have to work. And another fairly easy, solution would be that we all turn hermits and we, turn to Buddhism and, stop doing our job. But it is not an option. I mean, it is an option, but it's not, I hope, not an option for everyone. So if we do stay and design, we have to consider how we can do it while caring for ourselves and while caring about our profession, about design. Okay, so design profession as an object of care, as itself, and as designers. And that means that we have to own the readiness to care. And that goes back to what I defined earlier as external good, which means that designers have to create their own value systems in which they own their own red lines or ethical boundaries. Okay, so from readiness to care to self-enactment, which means that the readiness to care is not only some sort of ethical or philosophical value, but it actually can and should be a key part of how we teach designers and how designers think of themselves as professionals. Okay, so Paula shared that, obviously you all know, said that things that have to be held onto, things that have to be protected to make something move forward. And it's very, very hard work. And again, we can see these kind of quotes in a lot of designers that have been practicing their craft for the last 30 years. Milton Glaser said similar things, and a lot of other designers said that money is indeed a part of the equation, but it's a fairly small part of it. A larger part of it is creating a change and feeling good about what you do in your field. So again, a tough question would be how to do it. So as I mentioned, one option obviously would be to say we don't do it anymore. Another option would be to say that we don't care, as Khadid says, and other architects and designers says, and again, for us, it's not an option. So the third option would be to try and define some other way, and through this way, designers keep professing their job, but they do it in a different manner. Okay, so this manner could be that when designers get a brief or when they conduct a dialogue with their client or with municipalities or with NGOs or whatever, they conduct it in a certain manner that they feel that they're conducting the work in a responsible way, but again, have a dialogue with their own values, again, as individuals and as practitioners in a specific profession. Okay, so design responsibility, or again, transforming a caring about into actual care, I mean, not only caring about something, but actually caring, is a way of becoming oneself from both a professional and a personal point. And again, that would avoid, going to submitting yourself to a mental health institute and still doing what you do best and what you love. And as we can do that, again, after we start by teaching the next wave of students to think a bit differently, and after we define our own value systems, then we can navigate between these kind of tertiary fields and still keep on what we consider as something that can give designers a way of living and earn a salary, but still follow their own personal value systems and their professions. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, the conclusion is, first of all, as we all know, ethics has surfaced in the last few years, but usually it's either philosophers or theoreticians that teach it. We believe that it needs to be a collaboration between practitioners and theoreticians. As I mentioned, while Ariel is a philosopher, he is a graphic designer. So again, we have to consider again how we do still work with the practice, with NGOs, with the industry. I mean, they're not all bad. Some of them are, but not all of them. But again, it is a big chunk of this profession. So again, we have to consider ethics. We have to devise courses and workshops that deal with ethics from a practical point of view, from a professional point of view. And we have to integrate it into, obviously, our professional systems and our pedagogical teachings. Thank you.